All right. Welcome to the Learning Lounge podcast. I am Dr. Joel Gardner, and today I'll be talking with Jesse Furhman. Welcome, Jesse. I'm going to read a little bio about Jesse here so you can know who we're talking to. Jesse Furhman is an instructional designer here at the International Institute for Innovative Instruction at Franklin University. Instructional design faculty member, so he designs courses and teaches in our Masters of Instructional Design and Learning Technologies. Now, Jesse earned his Master of Arts in Technologies of Instruction and Media from The Ohio State University. He also holds a Master of Arts in Anthropology from Eastern New Mexico University and a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology and Music History from Dickinson College. So I think one of the things you've noted is your background in anthropology and studying human behavior has a big impact on how you, on your experience teaching and also course design. Yeah. So hopefully we'll hear some more about that as we talk today. So actually, Jesse, you and I have known each other for 4 years? Well, maybe 5, right? Because it was 2013 when we started doing all that work. So we started out, the first time I met you was when we were doing this planning session for this work we were doing for a university in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
And so it was kind of this thing where, as I'm remembering it, you and a couple others were working on this training course that we were going to deliver to this university, and then I and a few others were going to go deliver it. So it was kind of this, you were designing, I was kind of delivering, you were also doing a bunch of tech support kind of things.
Yeah. It was, exactly. There was a lot of work with, figuring out the learning management system because it was different than the one that we were using here.
Right.
So, it was a little bit of that, and they were new with their system too, so they needed a little bit of help with it as well. So they didn't always know exactly how to work it or what the best way to use it was.
Right, because we were training them on how to effectively use this technology to teach in an online environment. So let's talk about that. So that was a learning management system. We really were focused on that particular thing in this training. But let's talk about, so today we're talking about what do you need from your LMS? That's the topic we picked. And really, let's just talk about LMSs, learning management systems. So how would you define a learning management system?
So I would say a learning management system is a software package that assists with all of the tasks that you need to do in order to effectively manage a classroom. And while we use it primarily for a lot of online classes, a lot of places also use it to modify, or to enhance the kinds of things they do for face-to-face classrooms as well. It's just used a little bit more and is a little bit more dependent on for online classes in a normal academic kind of setting.
Right. So this is kind of the focus. We typically focus anyway on higher education sorts of learning management systems. There are other versions of that that are used in like a corporate setting or even in a K-12 setting, at least in my experience. These are all kind of different, but they have that idea. I like your term, a software package that manages sort of the components, the digital components of learning, right?
Right, okay. Exactly, yeah. So, they're all pretty much going to have a way to present some sort of kind of static content. They're usually going to have a discussion board where there's interaction between the students themselves, the students and the instructor.
Yeah.
There's also usually going to be some kind of an assessment tool that allows you to do objective assessments as much as possible,
Right.
And, it'll probably, can usually also be used to facilitate more subjective assessments as well as doing survey kind of things. And then there's also usually going to be something, some sort of a Dropbox kind of thing where you're going to submit assignments, and there might, depending on which system you have, there's going to, might be other things attached to that help enhance each of those different pieces.
Right. Yeah. And so those are kind of the core tools, the core interactive tools that you might have between the teacher and the student or the students with each other, right?
Right.
And sometimes they're just interacting with the content. So it's interesting to me, at least in my observation of the field of instructional design generally, we have people coming from all these different paths. And when I was doing my Masters of Instructional Design, it was instructional technology, there were people who were engineers, there were people who were in communication or business, or all these different backgrounds coming to this degree. So maybe if you can just tell about your path to becoming an instructional designer and then working so much with LMSs.
Yeah, sure. So I actually came to this a little differently. I think, a lot of us do, being a program that's typically not found in a bachelor's program. It's only at master's and, PhD levels. Right. And so I was working, I was at Ohio State University as a PhD student in anthropology, actually. And that program was losing enrollment, actually, for in some of their gen ed courses because other departments in the same category were offering online courses and we didn't. And so the department chair came to me, said, I noticed that you use the LMS a lot in your classes. Would you be comfortable devising, sort of designing the course for an online setting? And then, and taking that, term to do that and then go ahead and teach it after that. And I said, yeah, sure. That'd be great. I think that's awesome. So they asked me that. I took a couple of education courses to sort of help prepare myself a little bit in that area. And then I ended up taking the time to devise that course, figure out exactly how I wanted it, taking into account all the different kinds of things that you have to take into account, things like how many students are going to be in the class and, is there a way to do, how to manage the grading for that kind of a load, because they were still going to put, I think 70 students in the class or something like that. But anyway, so I ended up doing that. And then eventually I found that I was doing so much more in the design of that maybe I was preferring to do that as opposed to teaching, which is what I was planning to use the PhD for, because I wanted to teach. And I thought, I can do more this way. I can touch more people. I can help more people doing this. So then I switched over to a second master's degree in education. And that really is what sort of set me on this path, was devising, using the LMS to its, sort of its fullest capacity in teaching and setting it up as clearly and as, in a supportive way for the students as possible.
That's good. So, and kind of underlying what I'm hearing you say, at least, and maybe this isn't exactly what you're saying, but one of the things that I've always kind of thought and approaches that I've always tried to take when I'm creating learning experiences is that the technology or even the medium of communication or the way the interaction is taking place in a learning experience should support whatever the learning is that you want to have happen. Right?
Right.
So some people flip it around and they say, well, we've got this amazing technology. We're going to use it to teach this class. Right? Right. Exactly. And that's really, putting the cart before the horse kind of thing. It's really backwards to how you really want to do that, because what you end up doing is you end up using, a piece of technology that maybe isn't the best for what you want to do, for what you really need to accomplish, right? So if you're starting from learning objectives and trying to meet those and assess those, then that's really where you need to start. And then the technology is just the medium through which you can facilitate that. Right. It should support it or facilitate it, not, we have to fit this class to whatever the technology is.
Right, exactly.
And there's so many technologies available now, right? And LMS is kind of like the hub or the core of the course, but you may use other technologies that are outside of the LMS, or most LMSs have many tools within the LMS that you can utilize to support whatever learning goal you have or learning outcomes you have.
Right, exactly. And a lot of them will have ways to integrate those things that you have outside. And be able to pull them in either through SCORM, where you have some sort of technology that allows you to interface between a piece of e-learning or something like that and the LMS, or through LTI, which I think stands for Learning Technology Integration, which allows you to pull in things from some other server, that's in some other thing that may have some sort of, learning either a connection to, some other kind of learning technology, quizzing thing or something else, that allows you to record some information, and then it'll send it into the LMS so that you're able to record that information and use that in assessing the learning.
Very cool. Very cool. So if you were, there are a lot of mistakes people make with using technology to support learning. So what are some top strategies or tips or recommendations you would give to people who are really wanting to maximize the use of a learning management system?
So the main thing is that you are using the technology in a way that supports the learning, right, as we've talked about.
Yeah.
And, one of the biggest things is things like, say you're working on, a discussion or something like that, or you want to use a discussion. Well, you have to make sure that whatever that you're actually trying to assess or whatever you're trying to support is fitting in a discussion, right? So one mistake that you see a lot is that people will ask an objective question in a discussion board.
Mm-hmm. Like a yes or no.
Or yes or no, or it has a particular right answer.
Yeah.
And that just isn't, because the first person answers it and they kind of give it away. And then what else are you going to say, right? It needs to be something that can be debated or that you can bring other experiences into, right, that might be different for each individual student. Right. And so if that's a goal, right, if that's something that you want to include in the design, then you also have to make sure that that's sort of fitting into the learning objectives too, that the learning objectives are things that can be assessed that way. And so you have to sort of have some of that stuff in mind while you're formulating the objectives for the course. And, for each module or unit or however you're setting it up. And have those kinds of things in mind that they need to be something that I can assess with the tools that I have. They still fit. They still need to be the objectives that fit what your program is doing, what the needs of the students are, and all that kind of stuff. But you also have to adapt it a little bit to what are the tools that I have available to me, and how can I use them best to fit this content and these objectives?
That's interesting. So whenever you think about a process for designing something, right? Mm-hmm. In instructional design, the age-old model for the last 50 years is the ADDIE model. First you analyze and design, and then you develop. And so it's represented usually as this linear sort of model. But what you're suggesting, which makes sense to me and which I sort of naturally do, or at least I think designers typically do this, is they're already thinking about the learning environment. And that has an influence on the analysis and design, right?
Right.
Well, you have to think about it that way or else it doesn't make sense, right?
Right.
So it's kind of this, it's not linear, it's sort of...
Right. And I sort of think about it as it's a part of my analysis. What do I have available to me, right? If I'm doing the analysis and I need to know, what kinds of things the students are doing, typically before this, what are the background that they have, what is their intended, goal of the students in this program, are they going into a particular kind of job? Is there a particular kind of setting? Is it government? Is it corporate? All these different kinds of things.
Right.
So in addition to that, there's also, what's the environment they're going to be in? Right? If they have a particular learning management system that I've got to do this for, okay, so what are its properties? What are the things that I have to keep in mind? Are there things I can't do because their system doesn't support it? And so that's sort of one of these things where the LMS can sort of influence the design a little bit because, instructional design always happens within a particular context. Right. It's never going to be in a perfect ideal situation where you can just let the learning happen, and things of that sort. So you can do that as much as you can within the constraints that you have from, what are the policies of the institution, what are the technologies that it's using, who are the students that it has, and so. Right.
So it's design can be extremely complex, right? There's all these constraints that we have. Any field of design is that's how it's set up, right?
Yeah.
So many constraints, and you're considering all these things as you try to put together this piece that's going to actually reach or meet whatever the need is, the specific goals or outcomes or objectives, whatever term you want to use for that. But how do we make sure to meet those goals? So would you say that, so typically an instructional designer puts together a set of outcomes or objectives for a given learning experience, a course. Would you say that certain types of technologies are aligned better with certain types of outcomes? It sounded like that's kind of where you were headed earlier.
No, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. And there are certain things that I don't, that are, for example, like if you have an outcome that's more explanatory, that is either at sort of the upper end of what we consider the, lower order thinking skills, where you're trying to describe something, so where you're trying to make sure that the student has enough of an understanding that they're able to lay something out and describe how it works, right?
Right.
Or also at a higher end, where they're trying to explain why, something is the way it is, and if there's a particular set of circumstances that would influence it, so there's a little bit more of an analysis to it or something like that. Those kinds of things work really well in, a written paper or in a discussion board, but they're not things that you want to assess with an objective, multiple choice kind of assessment, right? So you don't want to use that sort of a thing. And that applies to both, online in a learning management system or in a face-to-face classroom. That's just not something you want to assess with a multiple choice test that you then run through a Scantron or something. Right? That's something that you want to be able to, you're actually stating in those objectives that they need to produce something, right? If you change that around, right, because at a similar level to describe, you might have, you need to be able to identify something or recognize it. If that's what you're saying, right, then you can actually say, all right, well, what are these different things? What is figure A represent? And you can list some choices and they can pick out one, and that's what they're doing. So you have to have some of that in mind when you're writing those objectives, because what you say you want them to do is what you're actually going to ask them to do, right? I mean, that's exactly. Really what it is, right? So if that's the case, then you need to make sure that the activities that you can do in the learning management system support those things.
Right. Excellent.
Right.
So it's alignment, right? Just
exactly.
Clean alignment across all the different components. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we've only got a few minutes here. One question I wanted to pick your brain on here is, what is the future of the learning management system? What do you think the future is of the LMS?
It's interesting because, we've worked with a number of different learning management systems, during the time that I've worked here, and we've worked with, a bunch of different companies that develop them, and they have different directions that they're going. But one of the things that I think is really, sort of on the horizon is this idea of more personalized learning. So heading more towards things like competency-based assessment, where there aren't necessarily as much grades as I've assessed that this person has actually met this objective, and that's what they need to do. And if they meet these 3 objectives, they get credit for this course or for this training module or whatever it is. And along with that, not just competency-based like that, but you also have sort of a trend towards more personalized learning, where a person states, okay, this is what I'm looking for. These are the kinds of things that we want to see, or that we were trying to use, or that we're trying to learn in particular kind of content or something like that. And then the platform, the learning management system, or whatever the technology is at this point, because it's sort of really more shifting towards something else, allows you to pick those things out, and it sort of funnels you through tracks, sort of acting almost in a way, kind of like if you had your learning management system and your registration system and everything sort of aligned and working together in perfect way so that for your particular academic program, it would actually shunt you through the pathway that you need to do, and it would just sort of automatically get you the content that you need.
Wow, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought that. So, and would these be still at a course level, or are we now looking at more micro level pieces of content that they would interact with, or activities they would do?
What I've seen with is looking at this more of like on a micro level, so that looking at a series of different kind of micro learning pieces, things. And I've seen this a lot more in corporate and nonprofit world, but you can see where something similar could be really useful and really interesting and kind of engaging and allow for a lot more student choice and things of that sort if you brought it into the higher education world.
Very interesting. There's a lot of power there.
Yeah, there would be.
One thing that I had been also thinking about with the future of the LMS. Well, you mentioned earlier about this idea of, before we started talking here, this idea of pulling in resources from outside of the LMS. And you kind of talked about that a little bit earlier while we were talking here too.
Yeah, and so you see that a lot more with this newer technology, where they're pulling in more sort of resources from outside and allow you to do more things. Like you see automatic. I mean, at the basic level, we're talking about automatic embedding of videos from YouTube or something like that. But then on top of that, there might be more integrated interfaces for, say, like Harvard Business Review or something like that, in their cases, right? And so that you have more immediate access, and you don't have to necessarily shunt through, sort of shuffle through, log in through a library and stuff like that. But that you could do, those kinds of things would just be brought in automatically. They'd be tagged, right, so that you could search by a particular kind of keyword or whatever, and it would automatically show you all the different resources that you need, that you have available to you.
So along those lines, right now at Franklin here, University here, we've been working hard to integrate e-textbooks so that they're available within the LMS. You don't have to buy a book, you don't have to go out to some other website, but they're right there available, integrated in the LMS. You mentioned quizzes and so forth, test exams that are integrated to where the scores come over and some analytics related to that. So I think that's powerful. One other thing that I thought would continue to be powerful in the future of the LMS is learning analytics. At Franklin here, we have our home-built LMS, Blue Quill. And we've already started doing some pretty interesting things with analytics to really understand the learner experience, to pinpoint areas where we could revise the course itself or work on some training for our instructors. I think we're just scratching the surface of what's really possible.
Oh, yeah,
in the next 5 to 10 years, some amazingly powerful support can be given to our students and to designers to really help the learning happen.
Definitely, because, every little piece, everything, the more that you can keep the learning within the learning management system or whatever particular platform you're using, the more capability there is for capturing the information, right, that they're producing as they go through the course or training or whatever it is. And the more you have of information you have available, the better you can be on the analysis the next time around. Right.
So one other thing I wanted to mention too is you'll be teaching. We have a Master's of Instructional Design and Learning Technology. So will you be teaching the Learning Management System course? Is that next trimester? No, it's in the summer.
That's in the summer. Yeah, that's in the summer. And
maybe talk about that course just a little bit.
So in that course that I developed, actually, that was that's a course on learning management systems. And what the students actually have to do as they go through is sort of create a unit, a module of learning somehow and we make sure that they hit all the different kinds of tools that a typical learning management system has. Things like content presentation of some sort, discussions, assessment, Dropbox kind of thing. And then also bring in other kinds of technologies that kind of help enhance that. So doing things like creating infographics, doing bringing in other kinds of pieces of like e-learning that's SCORM compliant and putting that into the LMS such that it will actually report a score and things of that sort.
Great.
So that they have this opportunity to really use all the different kinds of tools that are available to people who are using a learning management system.
And I feel like you give them exposure to the different sort of types of LMSs. They actually interact with several, but it sounds like they drill in on one particular one.
Right, because they're in ours, right? They're in our homegrown
already
version,
learning in
right?
it.
So they're already working in that. But we have them use the two that are the most common in higher ed outside of that. So that would be Blackboard.
Right.
And we use the free version of Blackboard, which is Core Sites. And then we also have them use Moodle Cloud.
Awesome. Very cool. So it sounds like a great course. Really, really good opportunity for people to really get that exposure to the technologies. Well, we are out of time, so we better end here. But thanks, Jesse, for being here and talking about learning management systems. I wish we had a little more time to talk, but it's been good talking with you. All right, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.